We're here to talk about flying the Rocky Mountains, and we've got a COPA annual convention, trade show, and annual general meeting coming up. There's a lot of what I call flatlanders going to be headed this way, we hope.
I'm one of them. I'd love to be here. I don't know if I'll be here, but I'm a flatlander.
Yeah, and people that are, I'm fortunate, I learned to fly in the Rockies far too many years ago. People that haven't flown the Rockies before, there is a lot to understand about it, but they shouldn't be afraid of them. They should just be prepared for them. And this video is really to help our flatlander friends understand what they're getting into when they're crossing the rocks. And what they're getting into is one of the most fantastic experiences of their life, with certain risks and whatnot that they need to know about and be prepared for, and then they won't have any problems.
Sure. So I guess my first question would be, how would you start the process of planning the trip?
Yeah, so I think one of the first comments I would make is there's great mountain flying courses if people want to stop for an hour or half a day in Red Deer or Airdrie, and there's information about that on our COPA site, on our website. But obviously, the answer to almost every question you can ask is, it depends on the weather.
Yeah. And
so your first thing is to check the weather and the wind flows, and start to understand that before you start planning your route.
One really valuable resource is the NAV Canada Flight Information Center. The weather briefers in Kamloops, they're experts in the local area and the terrain and the weather patterns, because every valley across this province has its own unique micro system. The other thing, if I'm going to cross the mountains, is I don't start looking at the weather the night before. If I know I'm going to be doing a trip, I start watching it like 5 days before. You can really start noticing trends.
The trend.
Yeah, the trends are huge. Like if you watch the weather for 3, 4, 5 days in advance, you can kind of get an idea what those trends are, because they are fairly consistent.
Right. They can be, especially once the system settles over the area. That becomes then what you're going to expect.
One of the key things about mountain flying is you'll pretty much always get some turbulence, light, medium, or more serious. And most people don't want to be flying in extreme turbulence, let alone heavy turbulence, light or moderate. But I was taught early days is it's useful to think about the mountains like rocks in the river. And air, like water, is a fluid, and it's running down, and if the wind's coming heavily from the west, which it often is, then it's rising on the upwind side and falling on the lee side, and that makes for all sorts of interesting things. Right. And if we're flying in a pass rather than over top, then there's lift on one side of the valley and there's big sink on the other, and you need to know that. And
the wind will accelerate as it funnels through a pass, and it doesn't need to be something that you fear, you just need to be aware of it, right? So just like if you were float flying, you always want to know where your wind's coming from.
There's lots of free lift in the mountains, and there's lots of some really uncomfortable sink, full power and no climb and that stuff. You just want to stay away from those and take advantage of the free left.
Okay.
Now myself, I always fly direct, if weather permitting, but I usually like to get over top and fly direct, so I like to be above a lot of that. And if there's a scattered layer or even a broken layer and we're qualified VFR on top, then just above, as most pilots know, just above the cumulus, it's always smooth, and below them or in them is awfully rough.
Like, do you take your highest pass or ridge and then say 1,000 feet above or something like that?
Yeah, and it's funny, people say, well, some of those mountains go up to 11 or 12,000 feet. True. But most parts of the Rockies,
it's just this.
Yeah, it's just this.
Yeah.
Most parts of the Rockies at 9.5 or 10 or 10.5, you can drive around the odd peak, and as Ryan would say, you want to drive around the right side of it too.
Now, do you also try to look at a ridge and do the 45-degree cross thing?
Depending on your altitude, but if you're a couple of thousand feet higher, and I mean, I've been flying all my life in the mountains, I don't always do that 45 degree, but I always have an out. I always do.
And you want to define what we're saying about the out with the 45-degree?
Yeah, so if you're flying straight at a mountain and it's higher than you are at the same altitude, and you get into some sinking air, then you got to have an out. So the old rule of thumb is, as you say, is take a 45-degree angle, and then it's always easy to turn away.
And we all get so caught up in maintaining our altitude. Like I've planned my flight westbound at 8,500, so I'm going to maintain 8,500. If you're flying VFR, nothing says you have to maintain 8,500 if you're not in Class C controlled airspace, right?
Absolutely.
As long as you've got the buffer between you and the terrain below you. Sometimes the easiest thing and the most comfortable thing is to just go for the ride.
I'm a helicopter pilot, so I have a bit of a different kind of take on it. I'm rarely high above the mountains. I'm beside the mountains. When I fly up a valley, the tendency is that you'd want to think that I'm safer in the middle of the valley because I'm far from the rocks. Let's say you have a cloud layer above you and you're forced down the valley. We actually fly to the side of the valley. So when you're flying down the side of the valley, yes, you're closer to the mountain, but now you have this as your view of potential landing areas if you had an engine failure. If I'm flying up the middle of the valley and I have an engine failure, my only option is what's ahead of me. We never want to turn into the mountain as we're descending because you're getting a double penalty. The ground's coming up as you're coming down. If you're along the side of the valley, as the ground's dropping and you turn away from the mountain, you're gaining the altitude of the mountain dropping, but now you have this as your potential landing zones to pick your best option. If you limit yourself in the middle of the valley, you're limited to what's really ahead of you, and it might be the best option, might be what's behind you.
Then the question is which side of the valley, and actually normal protocol is the right side. However, if you're into falling air on the right side, then you fly on the left side. You fly where the air is giving you the advantage, not the disadvantage. Safety.
I think the biggest thing that keeps coming up in every little thing we're touching on here is the air, and I mean obviously that's the medium in which we fly, but it goes back to winds and updrafts, downdrafts, upper winds. I just want to touch on real quick, looking at the upper wind forecast. And not just knowing what direction the wind's coming from, but the wind velocity. I'll typically look at the 6,000 foot, 9,000 foot, and 12,000 foot upper winds. And if I want a relatively enjoyable flight, I'm looking at 20 knots as a max. 25 might be pushing it a little bit, but as soon as you start seeing 30, 35, 40 knots, it's going to be a rough day.
That also means if it funnels into a venturi of a small valley,
Speeds up.
Right. So even if we've got those 20 knot winds in the middle of that pass, could be as high as 35, 40 or more knots.
Easily.
Yeah, so it's just Venturi effect, right?
I crossed the Rockies less than 2 weeks ago, well, both ways, but my eastbound trip, it was as smooth as glass. I was at 11.5, it was as smooth as glass, but I had a 30 knot tailwind, so I was just smoking. And it was smooth as glass, and when I went over the ridge, which is just south of the border on the US side, when I went over that divide, boom, 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 and it was amazing. Not even a blister of rough air till bing, and it lasted like 15 seconds.
Yeah, and you're also generally going to see later in the day, you're going to see the cumulonimbus start growing. You're going to have areas across. There's going to be blue skies and a thundercloud, along the route.
Yeah.
It's something to expect, something to look for, something to do in your briefing and so on. But if you can do your crossings earlier in the day, you're probably going to be dodging less winds, less
turbulence.
Less turbulence.
If you get to Calgary and it's noon and you're thinking, I just want to push through to Kelowna, sure, you're still going to get there in 2.5 hours, but it may not be quite as enjoyable as an early departure.
It's going to be rough and nasty.
Yeah.
So time of day is a big factor.
Huge.
And you're going to find also later in the day also you're going to see the clouds drop. You're going to see things come down and they disappear, but you don't have that buffer. So if you're going to look to which of the two sides of the clock you want to do it at, definitely the earlier side of the clock.
But if we're following valleys, whether we're up on top of them or in them, there's three major valleys. There's the Crow's Nest in the south, Highway 3. There's the Kicking Horse Pass, which is Banff, Golden, Lake Louise, Rogers Pass, and then further north from Jasper west is the Yellowhead. So those are the three main passes through. They all come to Kelowna, fortunately for all of us, by slightly different routes.
If you can look on a VFR chart, I believe we're on the Calgary VNC here.
Yeah.
Despite being in BC, the chart actually splits
Right
just
here.
right west of Kelowna. So
Flight.
Yeah. So
use four
flight's good. 4 flight's really good for that. But if you're using paper charts, Kelowna actually sits on the Calgary VNC, and the VFR routes. The Flatlanders probably aren't too familiar with them because everything's a VFR route.
Yeah.
But on the map, you'll see a diamond trail that goes through the mountains.
And they're all clearly marked.
Those are recommended VFR routes, and really you can't go wrong with them so long as the weather's decent. And most of them follow roads for a good chunk. One thing that I found really helpful, speaking of ForeFlight, was before I took off, I mean, it's painstaking, but you zoom in and drag the route, drag and drop at every turn of the VFR route, and you can't get lost. Keep the airplane on the pink line and you'll always be in the right valley, right? So use those things to your advantage. Hazard Advisor on ForeFlight's a really good tool as well. You can see what's above you, what's below you.
You know, so actually plotting, taking the time to plot the entire course and write down every frequency in advance, that when you're going to be coming through the area, so you know, okay, when I hit Calgary, I'm on this frequency, and having all of your frequencies written for the entire route is a really good plan. And plotting the actual route on ForeFlight, I think is the...
Speaking of frequencies, file a flight plan.
Yep.
In the flight plan, specify which route you're going to take and be as specific as you want to be.
And you can say remarks.
In the remarks section, you can use plain language. You can say, I'm going to fly past Banff and then Lake Louise. I'm going to follow Highway 1 to Rogers Pass.
And put in an alternate route.
And that's actually a great plan too. In the remarks, put in an alternate route if you're not comfortable. I grew up flying on the coast. The mountains to me are a necessary evil to get to where I want to go. It's not my favorite thing to do, but it's something we do. So
I love them.
Yeah. And what's really important, even if you file the flight plan, is every 20 minutes, 30 minutes, make a position report. What that allows them to do, if they had to go looking for you, is disregard everything behind you. And they know, hey, at least he made it this far, we can start the search there. There's always the chance that you turned around and had to turn around for weather, but it gives them an idea of where you were at a certain point in time. So take advantage of making position reports, really important. But if there is radar coverage, feel free to call Vancouver Centre and request flight following. So long as you have a radio and radio communication with them, if they have you on radar, you can get flight following from them. And for a lot of people, especially from out east, it may just make them feel more comfortable having somebody on the other end of the radio.
We do it all the time where I fly.
You know, I always use flight following, and sometimes they say, at your altitude, I'm going to lose you in 2 or 3 minutes, but pick up Vancouver Centre on 133.5 in about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So you're only out of touch for 20 minutes.
The other big thing to keep in mind here is it's really tempting to climb up high with the mountains. You need a clearance to go above 12,500 feet. That is Class B airspace. If you go above 12.5, you're controlled VFR. But
You better have some oxygen on board.
and some oxygen, yeah. But oxygen isn't necessary to make this trip.
Right.
If you're going to go that
Absolutely
high, you need
not.
oxygen. You can 100% make this trip without oxygen.
Absolutely.
But that's a good point to make, because if you don't have experience with your own personal hypoxic symptoms, if you've never done it before, you should definitely start thinking about it at 10,000 even.
If you're coming from Eastern Canada, you know what? While you're over the flats, climb your airplane up to 9, 10, 11,500 feet and just see how you feel. Right? Start the clock when you go through 10,000 feet for your 30 minutes, but test your limits before you get to a place where you need your limits.
And remember, the first symptom of anoxia is a feeling of intense well-being.
Well, it's personal. It changes.
Yeah.
Some people say I only feel tingles.
Yeah.
Some people say I don't feel any noticeable symptoms, except other people tell me I'm saying stupid things.
I stopped caring.
But
Honestly, my inhibitions go. I'm just like, I'm totally relaxed.
Yeah, the issue is that you're the least capable of judging your condition.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
the issue. Yeah.
The other thing that just a good airmanship thing, especially in the mountains where radio reception is limited, is it's really good airmanship around here on your second radio to monitor 121.5. If somebody is in a position in a valley, they may, like, ATC may not be able to hear them on 121.5 with reception. But if you happen to be down that same valley, you may get reception. So it is good airmanship. We are here on a survival weekend, after all, to maintain a listening watch on 21.5 if you can.
One thing that I want to talk about real quick, because we're going to be flying through in the summer months, forest fires. That's something that you might see along the route. Make note of where they are, but you're not to be within 5 nautical miles of the edge of the fire at any point, and not below 3,000 feet above the fire.
Flying in the mountains has given me some of the most spectacular moments of my life, really. But nature in and of itself is a powerful thing, and the nature in the mountains is staggeringly powerful. So we need to always have respect for the mountains, and be prepared, make a good plan, be prepared to adjust it, and talk to Kamloops, the FIS.
And talk
These
to other
guys
pilots.
are really good. Talk to other pilots, talk to the locals.
Yeah.
And
Before you take off, talk to Kamloops while you're en route.
or even meet up with another pilot on the other side and just fly in proximity with another airplane. Sometimes that's just comforting in itself to
Absolutely.
be with somebody else, right?
Convoy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, again, I'm a helicopter guy. I'm in a different sort of altitude range, and I hate flying anywhere but the mountains. I always say the one thing that bores me to death is flying in a straight line for 2 hours somewhere. I go north every chance I get. You're gonna love the mountains. Like when you fly across it, when you see what's out here, it will. I don't know what you guys are doing at COPA. I don't know what the agenda is. This is the first I've heard of it in terms of this event. But just to come out here and be a part of it, it's something you'll never forget.